Picture this. You're running through the woods at your summer camp being pursued by a man in a pig mask with red glowing eyes and a giant axe that he's dragging behind him. Or maybe you're at a carnival where the puppets have come to life and they're chasing you and your friends around, desperate to murder you. That's your average day in the game Final Girl. And it is no better represented than when you can actually use these minis to play the game. I partnered with Van Ryder Games to make a two-part series where we're going to be painting through all of these minis so that you can have a beautifully painted set to be playing on your table when you show everyone your Final Girl game. In the series, we'll be going over two different painting methods. One where we're going to take our time, we're going to do a lot of detail work, and we're going to show off all the really great and rich characteristics that these minis have in store for us. And the second method we'll use, which I refer to as a sun drop method, to help you knock out all of these in a very short amount of time with a little effort so that you're ready to move on to your Series 2 minis. This box contains characters from a bunch of different Final Girl features, including Camp Happy Trails, Creech Manor, Sacred Groves, Carnival of Blood, Maple Lane, and Terror from Above. Each of these features looks a lot like films you may have seen, and we'll be going through and painting the protagonists and the villains from each of these series. This box features a villain and two heroines from each series that you'll be using to play through whenever you play your Final Girl features. Some of these minis vary in size from what I would consider to be a rather approachable point of view to something that I would consider some of the smallest minis I've ever seen. Never fear, we will be going through this step by step so that you do not have to worry about anything like brush control, shaky hands, anything of the above. We're going to be going through, and I'm going to take you step by step through the process of painting these, whether you want to do a full detailed paint or simply the quick and easy sun drop method.
Jamie, are you saying it's more than just Nuln Oil?
It's kind of Nuln Oil. I myself have already gone through and painted Hans the Butcher and the two protagonists from Camp Happy Trails, some of my favorite paint jobs I've done. And I've already started a little bit on the Carnival of Blood characters with my partner Rachel on our stream. On my stream. Let me try that again.
Our stream, comrade.
Carnival of Blood are the ones with these teeny tiny little puppets. The smallest things I've literally ever seen in my life.
Puppets.
They're so small. They're so small. They're not toddlers. They're puppets. Now, the size of these minis is admittedly a little bit challenging for new painters, and this series is all about helping to introduce new painters to the fun of painting minis. I find that the board game space is kind of lacking in painters compared to where I come from, which is more of a traditional wargaming background, so I'm trying to bring painting to the board game world by showing you guys it's not scary. I promise. It's just paint. You can do it. I believe in you. Okay, you can do it. Now, if this is your first time painting, I will give you a pretty thorough step-by-step instruction as to what products you'll need, what sort of techniques you'll be using, and how to apply those techniques as we go through this process. My goal here is to keep this as inexpensive in both a time and money sense so that you can spend more of your money and time playing and buying other board games. And if you're wondering, who the heck is this person and why are they talking to me? Get out of my living room. No, I'm just kidding.
2008 called. They want their YouTuber
I know, right?
joke back.
Hi, I'm Jamie Daggers. I'm a full-time professional mini painter and streamer. I'm also a game designer, a YouTuber, as you can see, and I do all sorts of other things. But primarily, I am a full-time artist dedicated to sharing my love of mini painting with my beloved hobby of board gaming and the mini space in general. I've built a community surrounding the hobby itself, and I really love to see it flourish. It's full of other artists and creators that I admire and am happy to call friends, and I wanted to bring some of that energy here to the board game space by showing off games that I love, like Final Girl. If you're interested in more stuff from me, I do have a series just like this on Wonderland's War, where you may pick up a tip or two about painting something that isn't either of these games. I myself have been working in the board game and minis industry for about 5 years now. I've been painting for that entire time, and I really just started doing full-time painting about 2 or 3 years ago. I found very quickly that I have a passion for teaching mini painting, so I've decided to start a Twitch, a YouTube, and I teach at conventions, as well as my Patreon, where I have one-on-one group sessions and drop-in office hours via Discord. As someone who does competitive mini painting from time to time, I do feel that there's an attitude sometimes surrounding painting that makes it inaccessible for a lot of people. My goal is to make it a little bit more approachable from the perspective of somebody who might be entering with no knowledge of painting whatsoever. Sure, you can admire all those cool minis that are in the case, but the last thing I want is for you to walk away from there feeling like you can't do that. Now, maybe it will take some effort and some practice to get to that level, but I promise you, if you follow these tips, you will be much further along than I think that you know that you're capable of. The following is a list of materials that you're going to need to paint along with today's video. Please feel free to pause this if you miss anything. For our first paint through, we're going to be painting Asami from the Carnival of Blood feature. Asami is depicted here wearing a sweater with a skirt and holding 2 daggers. For this paint through, we're going to be using very few colors. Now I want to remind you that the colors that I use are not strictly necessary to paint this model. I would recommend to find a similar color in the lineup of paints that you have, or if you need a reason to go buy paint, now's your opportunity. There are lots of resources online where you can compare different color brands to other ones. So, for example, if you have magenta in Pro Acryl, you can Google to see what that same color is in Vallejo's lineup. To get started painting Asami, the first thing you're going to want to do is prime her. Now, I recommend a brush-on primer, especially if you're going to be doing a one-off paint session where this is the only thing you're going to be painting. I also don't usually recommend rattle can or spray can primer on PVC minis. I find that it interacts poorly with the plastic of the mini and makes it so that there's a very glossy finish on the final product, making it much harder to paint. There's numerous other reasons I recommend brush-on primer, including it being a great way to get you into a painting session you didn't even know you had in you. For this approach, I tend to recommend a brand like Stynylrez Res or Black Gesso from Liquitex. Now, gesso is used in the fine art community to prime canvases, so it is a very thick paint. I do recommend thinning it very slightly before you put it on the mini, and I definitely recommend letting it cure for a while before you start painting on it. Even though gesso is a little bit more finicky than you would get out of a Stynylrez prime, the matte finish on it is unlike any other primer I've used. Now, once Asami is fully coated in that black primer and it's fully dry, the first thing I'm going to do is take a gray dry brush and dry brush her from top to bottom to get an idea of what the model looks like. If you need more info on dry brushing, I'd like to point you to these shorts. So using a top-down motion, we're going to be dry brushing her with this gray paint. Without getting too lost in the technical weeds, what this does is it establishes all of the volumes and the lighting that we're going to be trying to retain as we paint Asami. So all of the features of her that are catching the most paint would be catching the most light. That gives us a visual example of the places that we're going to want to maintain that brightness to really make this model pop. Once that gray is fully dry, we're going to go in first with skin tone. I always recommend painting the deepest portion first. And by deepest, what I mean is the piece of the mini that will require the most travel from you to the mini in order to apply paint with your brush. The reason for that is that if you don't do that, and let's say you've painted this skirt and you painted it beautifully and you go to paint the flesh tone on the legs and you make one mistake and all of a sudden you have flesh tone on your beautifully painted skirt. So I recommend painting the deepest portions first and moving outward from there, so that you don't make any mistakes when you're just trying to paint later. It'll save you from a lot of headache and a lot of fear as you go through the painting process. In this case, it doesn't matter if you're going to be sloppy with that application because you're going to be painting over it. Now, this model's kind of unique in that she's holding a dagger in front of her face and her sweater, so we're going to want to focus on painting her face and sweater before we start working on the other parts of that arm. This is for the same reason I mentioned before about the flesh tones. We're just going to try to avoid situations in which we will have to go past these other painted features in order to access the thing we're trying to paint. So we're going to take a flesh tone. I've chosen Rosy Flesh from Cuttlefish Colors, and we're going to apply that all over the exposed areas of her flesh. So her bare legs, her forearms, and her face. Once that's nice and dry, we're going to move on to painting her hair and her skirt. For this, we're just going to be using Coal Black from Pro Acryl. Again, we're going to be painting the skirt before we paint the sweater, so if you end up painting over the dagger that she has hidden behind her back, or even up onto the sweater around her midriff, that's okay. We'll fix that later. With the hair, I am painting over the clip she has on the back of her head because we will go again later to pick that out. Now I'm just applying black to the whole top of her head and the front of her face where her bangs are hanging down on the left side of her face. If you accidentally paint over her ears, you can always go back with that rosy flesh color and pick those out after you've painted the black on. One reliable rule that I like to point out to painters is that if you have a hard time painting it, just don't paint it. Those areas are in shadow anyway. because typically they're being covered by something else. So if you can get your brush in there and get a little bit of paint on there, that's fine, but don't worry too much about it. As a quick reminder, we're going to be thinning our paints as we go. I usually recommend not using paint straight out of the bottle or the pot. I always rinse my brush in a little bit of water, wick away a lot of the moisture, and then put it into my paint before I apply it to the model. This will help ensure that the layers that you're putting on the Mini are nice and smooth and not piling up every time you go back to add more. It's easier to add more paint than it is to take it away. So once the black of the hair and the skirt is dry, we're going to go through with Dark Plum from Pro Acryl on the sweater. We'll be using that Dark Plum again later, so do set it aside before you put it away. Don't forget to touch up her boots with some of the black paint before you end up putting that one away too. So now that the skirt and the sweater are painted, we're going to go back and we're going to shade the skin tone ever so slightly. We're going to be using a warm brown from Pro Acryl, and we're going to thin that down quite a bit. I would say 3 parts water to 1 part paint. This is what you might consider a wash consistency, and the idea of this is that it's going to run into all the cracks and crevices and the details of her face so that we can avoid having to finely paint those details. Now ideally, as this dries, it won't look so aggressive. When you first put it on, you may find that it pools in places and it looks like there's going to be a lot of pigment resting there. But by virtue of us watering down the paint, when the paint dries, it's not actually going to leave behind a lot of pigment. So ideally, it will just shade in the places that we want it to, and it'll create a really nice effect. This is one of those moments where you kind of just have to trust the paint. You have to let it dry before you make any rash decisions. So even though it seems like you may have overpainted in areas or you've put it in places it doesn't belong, it's still a shadow color. So wherever it rests, it should create depth. Now once that's fully dry, you can see the magic of washes. A lot of people on my side of the hobby like to call this stuff liquid talent because of how quickly and easily it works. While you've got the warm brown out, go ahead and paint the strap that she has over her shoulder and around the front and back of her sweater. If you didn't paint the boots black, this would be a good opportunity to use the brown on those too. Next, we're going to paint the blades of the daggers. I've chosen Diesel Blue from Cuttlefish Colors. So this is what I would refer to as color blocking. This is essentially establishing all of these colors before we start adding more detail to it. Now, at this point, all of those colors have been added and dry and ready for that detail work. The next step is going to be blending some of the colors that we've already used. Just follow the step-by-step if you're not feeling comfortable about blending your own paints. First things first, I'm going to take the purple from her sweater, and I'm going to mix it with a tad of that rosy flesh color. This should work with any flesh tone, so as long as you have something that is remotely peachy, you can mix it in little by little with the purple to create these beautiful highlights. So the first thing we're going to do is mix that flesh tone into the purple, and we're going to use that new lavender color that we've created to paint her leg warmers just above her boots. While you've got this color created, you can always go back and add highlights to the details of her sweater. The next thing I'm going to do is take some of that diesel blue and mix it again with the flesh tone to create a lighter blue that we're going to paint onto the edges of the daggers. Or you could paint red onto the edge of the daggers to make it look as if Asami's already had one run-in with the puppeteer. While you've got the red out, I would paint the little clip on the back of her hair. Take all the time you need. It's kind of small in a sea of black, so just take it slow and easy, and you'll get it done in no time. There are certainly other things you can do to this model if you're feeling confident. For example, adding some highlights to the top of her hair, the front of her sweater, or even highlighting the black of her skirt. I think those are a little bit more complicated, so we don't have to go into details on those now. And there you have it, Asami fully painted, ready to be played in Carnival of Blood. So now that Asami is fully painted, hopefully you're feeling a little bit more capable and excited to paint more of the minis in this set. We are also going to be creating a second video that goes over how to paint these in an even easier way if you found that this is just a little too intense for you. Another thing to consider is that you may want to paint all of the protagonists using this detailed method, and in the second video, again, we'll be covering a little bit more of an atmospheric or cinematic effect that you could apply to all the villains. There's no obligation to paint every mini in this box, but I'm hoping that today's video helps you feel a little bit more equipped and excited to do so. Whether you enjoyed the detail painting or the sun drop painting more, I hope you feel a little bit more empowered and capable to paint through these minis because it's such a joy to do so and see the painted minis while you're playing your game. I genuinely feel a game with as much style and panache as Final Girl deserves painted minis. This cinematic game is something that can only be enhanced by painted minis, so don't be afraid, you can do it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on The Process. My name is Jamie Daggers, and this isn't the only place you can find me. I actually run a Tuesday through Friday stream over on twitch.tv/JamieDaggers, where I will be painting from 1 to 5 p.m. almost every day. One of my favorite things that we do over on my Twitch channel is every Friday we do a 4-color challenge where I have chat pick 4 colors and I paint a mini start to finish using only those 4 colors. The one you're seeing right now is one that we did most recently, and believe it or not, that is 4 colors only. Otherwise, you can see me do all other sorts of weird stuff like drawing Pokemon from memory and sharing all sorts of fun stories and anecdotes with the community at large. I'm also always teaching people over on the stream, so if you have any questions as you go through this process, don't be afraid to come over and ask them to me while I'm live. I love teaching people mini painting, and stream is no different. I also have a handful of other YouTube videos that you'll find here on my YouTube account, and shorts that go through technical skills that you might want to brush up on. Brush. I'm posting almost daily over on Instagram of all the finished models and projects that I'm working on, and I also post funny TikToks, Reels, and YouTube Shorts. I would love to have you guys follow along and enjoy this beautiful hobby with me. I would love for you to join our Discord community where we're always sharing all sorts of art and doing things like community movie nights, game nights, things like that. Just sharing the joy of this hobby and being people who love it all in one space. If asking questions on stream isn't your thing, or asking questions in a Discord, I do have a Patreon where I'm teaching group classes, one-on-ones, and even drop-in office hours where you can bring anything to the table, and I will gladly walk you through whatever it is you need to learn. Those are all available through my Patreon. We host them through Discord, and I would love to have you be a part of that. And while we're on the topic, I want to thank all of my patrons that you see here on the screen right now. As a full-time artist, my income comes mostly from streams and patrons like these wonderful people here who have been supporting me over the past few months as I explore this new career being a full-time mini painter. Thank you so much again for joining me. My name is Jamie Daggers, and don't forget, if you can't trust yourself, trust the process.